Ladies and gentlemen, boys and girls, welcome back to another episode of the Raw Prospect Podcast. Today we're entering the home stretch of the NBA season, covering the Western Conference. A part two of an episode we did a couple of weeks ago covering the Eastern Conference. We're gonna be making a few changes to what we did in that episode, where we predicted the seedings in the Eastern Conference and then predicted the playoffs. In this episode, it's going to be more about scenarios, more about discussing what matchups each team will be looking for and which matchups will they possibly have the edge in from their perspective. And we'll be having a lot of conversations surrounding that, along with the play-in tournament as well. But to get into it, leave a like on the video, subscribe to the channel if you have not already. We're going to continue to make NBA content throughout the playoffs. They're coming up here in about, I think, less than a week. Here the play-in tournament is going to be. So, hey, Matthew. And yeah, joining me from Houston, Texas, the Stat King himself, Mr. McElwain. How you doing?
Hello, everyone. Welcome in. Tuesday, April 9th. Hopefully everyone's April's off to a rousing start. We're already in the fourth month of 2024, and April means a lot of things. We just had March Madness wrap up last night. We'll be talking about that on Deep in the Heart of Longhorn Sports here very soon. We have the Masters this week. We'll be talking about that and a whole lot more tomorrow night as that kicks off Thursday. We've got the NFL draft at the end of the month. We're going to talk a whole lot about that here in the next couple weeks. And then in between all of that, we've got the NBA playoffs, which kick off with the play-in tournament next week. And then the first round, I think, not this weekend, but next weekend. And then we also have, if you're a hockey fan and you're into that, I believe NHL playoffs start around the same time. So we've got a lot of things going on. In between all that, we've got, Major League Baseball. And the big story surrounding Major League Baseball is all these injuries that are piling up with the pitching. So we'll talk about that very soon, but we're here to talk about the NBA. So before we get into all this, I thought I would just start by kind of laying out the standings coming into tonight, Tuesday, April 9th, for everyone in the Western Conference, because these things change almost on a day-to-day basis. So let's update everyone on where we stand with less than a week to go. The regular season ends on Sunday, I believe, right? So we have the Timberwolves and the Nuggets tied at the top, basically. Although the Timberwolves, I guess, have a tiebreaker over the Nuggets, so they're in the 1 seed, and the Nuggets are in the 2 seed. But they're both 54-24, and they're both 7-3 in their last 10 games coming into tonight. We have the Thunder as the 3 seed at 53-25, 1 game back of those teams. But I believe you said they lost tonight, and so
they came back and won tonight.
They came back and won. Right. So they're sitting in 3 still. The Clippers are in the 4th spot, although they were getting drilled by the Suns before we came on here. They were 50-28 coming into the night, although they were 3 games back of the Thunder with probably like less than 5 games to go. You've got your Mavericks sitting in the 5th spot, 49-30 now with their big win over some crappy team tonight. Then the Suns are sitting in that 6th spot, the final actual playoff spot, not the play-in tournament, at 46-32. They were winning over the Clippers when we last checked. And then you have the Pelicans, the Kings, the Lakers, and the Warriors currently pretty close together, all separated by like 2 games in the play-in tournament. So I think the way that we'll do this is we'll work our way from the bottom to the top. We'll talk about the play-in since that's on the horizon. And I think there's an interesting conversation to be had with the Lakers and the Warriors, who are currently playing right now. And then we'll work our way up and we'll talk about the 1 through 6 seeds and where they stand and who they match up well against and who they don't. So let's get into it.
Yeah, let's do it. Let's start with the play-in tournament. I think that's going to be with, most likely a combination of Steph Curry, LeBron James on the Lakers, and then the Kings most likely, and then either the Pelicans or the Suns in that final seventh spot in the play-in tournament. So in that 9-10 slot, in those 9-10 slots, right now it's currently Warriors and Lakers, and they're playing right now tonight. But for those two teams, let's start with the Warriors. What have you liked about what you've seen lately? They have been playing much better here with Trace Jackson Davis in the starting lineup. What have you liked out of what you've seen from them lately? And what do you think their ideal scenario in terms of seedings is?
Well, first of all, they are coming into tonight sitting at 43-35. So they've had a pretty good season.
Yeah.
Nothing special. They're 10th in offensive rating and they're 14th in defensive rating. So they're above league average in both offense and defense. And they have a net rating of 2.2, which is less than past Warriors teams. But we all know that this Warriors team, from almost the very start of the season, had some very clear flaws. Right. They're a flawed basketball team. But what I like about them right now is they're pretty healthy, relatively, with less than a week until this whole thing gets kicked off. And their top two lineups, the ones that they run out there the most often, are really good. And they've been really good. That's what has them pretty much in this spot. I think for the Warriors, in order for them to, say, get into the playoffs, get out of the play-in, get into the playoffs, and for this to be a successful season, which I think would be to win a playoff series possibly and get to the second round, as long as they don't face the Nuggets as the 8th seed in the first round, I could talk myself into Golden State possibly, upsetting the Timberwolves, upsetting a team like the Thunder in the first round if that scenario played out that way. I think that in order for them to do that, though, they're going to need Steph to, of course, elevate his play and be the best player on the floor for a lot of these games. They're going to need their secondary and tertiary scorers and creators to continue to create opportunities offensively. And they're going to need to continue to, play the kind of defense that's gotten them to this point. Get out in transition, create open threes. But I do like a lot of things that they have been showing. And I think, Steve Kerr will probably need to get creative come the playoffs in finding ways to disrupt opposing offenses. And I'm interested to see how he does that. I'd be curious to know your thoughts on that. But the way that they're playing with Steph, Clay, and Draymond, as long as those guys are healthy, I could talk myself into them at least taking a series deep against Minnesota, although I do think Minnesota's size and their athleticism might bother the Warriors a little bit. And I could definitely see them taking the series fairly deep with the Thunder, just because of some of the Thunder's limitations that we'll talk about later and kind of their inexperience in these kind of situations. But I'm interested to know what you think.
Yeah, I think the Warriors, I really like what they've found in the draft this year. I think their saving grace this year is that they've continued to draft extremely well. They went out and drafted Trace Jackson Davis. They got him in the late second round. I think they traded with the Wizards or some team like that, and it was a trade for the pick that they got Trace Jackson Davis with, and it was for cash. So they traded cash to get a solid, I guess, center of the future for them, which is fantastic value, obviously. And then of course Brandon Podziemski, who's been submitted into the starting lineup and I think has exceeded all expectations. I think the problem with the Warriors, I think, is going to be mostly on the offensive end of the floor. I think defensively, when they're focused, when they're not turning the ball over offensively and teams are getting, fast break opportunities, when they're able to set their defense, they are a really good defense, especially with the version of Andrew Wiggins that we've seen recently. They're long and athletic in a lot of those lineups they have with, Draymond Green and Andrew Wiggins together. And they definitely, I think they can put enough good defensive lineups together to where if Steph is Steph, they can, be dangerous to anybody. I think the problem they're going to run into is if they are in the 9 or 10 seed, the highest they can get to is 8. Because if you win that 9-10 game, you have a winner go home to get the 8th seed. So for them to reach their potential and possibly upset a team in the first round, I think the biggest thing is I don't think they can draw Denver. They're a small team. They are a very good rebounding team, despite that. But I think the problems that Jokic presents and the stress of how good the Denver Nuggets execute offensively, the stress that'll in turn put on the Warriors offense to score is going to be a little bit too much, I think.
I agree. I don't think they can draw Denver, but you could talk me into, once again, maybe the Timberwolves, possibly the Thunder, a series like that.
Right.
If Steph is himself, the Steph that we've seen for the past 10 years, and, they're not turning the ball over, they're playing sound basketball offensively, their secondary and tertiary creators are creating consistent offense in the half court, and they're not turning the ball over, and they're setting their defense, and they're focused. That's a lot of ifs and a lot of things that must come together, and that's why they're in the position that they're in. But it could happen. I could see it. Now, if they had to play the Lakers in a 9-10 matchup, let's talk about the Lakers a little bit here. What would you be looking for in that matchup? And where do you stand on the Lakers right now? How far do you think they could potentially take themselves? And what matchups are favorable to them, in your opinion?
Well, I think for the Lakers, the matchup that I think is most favorable for our first round series is definitely the Thunder, just because of their size and physicality as a team. I think their backcourt will still be an issue, regardless of who they play. I think the pairing of Austin Reeves and D'Angelo Russell will be a struggle defensively, but they've played good enough offensively to where it hasn't been as much of an issue, especially for D'Lo. D'Lo's been fantastic this year. But from a rebounding standpoint, just from a aggregate size standpoint in all of their lineups, especially with Rui Hachimura, LeBron, and Jared Vanderbilt, those types of guys all healthy, I think that would be a very intriguing matchup. I think I'll save what I would think it would happen in that series for when we talk about the Thunder later on, but I think that would be a very, very competitive series.
Yeah, I would like that too. For the Lakers, LeBron James and Anthony Davis, although they're not playing together tonight, as Anthony Davis is out tonight, they played over 1,650 minutes together, and that's their highest total in Davis's 5 seasons with the Lakers, and more than they've actually played together over the last 2 regular seasons combined.
Wow.
So I like that. like you have your two best players healthy for most of the year and playing together for most of the year. So they have a lot of games under their belt, and they seem to be, other than a minor issue tonight for Anthony Davis, ready to get into to get in that play-in tournament at full strength, or at least close to it. However, they've taken a slight step down actually from last year in point differential. But the thing that I like about that particular matchup with the Thunder is not only their size advantage on the interior and at a lot of other spots on the floor, but they're tied with the Mavs this year for the best record in games that are within 5 points in the last 5 minutes.
Wow. Yeah.
And I think potentially in a high pressure playoff series, say, they're in the 8-1 matchup with the Thunder. Somehow that happens. And, in these high pressure situations, the longer a series goes in those closer games, that could play into the Lakers' favor just with their experience and their know-how against the Thunder. And then, I like the way that D'Angelo Russell has played this year. I like what Austin Reeves can give them. It's like a third or a fourth option offensively most nights. And then as long as James and Davis are on the floor, LeBron obviously still playing at an exceptionally high level. And what is this, his 21st season? And if Davis is healthy, I think the Lakers, given a favorable matchup, not against Denver, which seems to be a common theme of this, what might be a common theme, here moving forward, nobody wants to play that Nuggets team. I think, reasonably expectations should be make it through this play-in tournament minimum, and then maybe win a playoff series. That should be it. But right now, coming into the night, they were 45-34, so even better than the Warriors. I believe they had won 9 of their last 10.
Yeah, playing really well.
As recently as today. I believe that was a stat that I read.
Yeah, I think 18-5 in their last 23 games as well.
So they're playing well right when you want to be playing well, which is great for the Lakers.
Yeah.
Okay. Go ahead.
Let's move on to the Kings now. They've had a really rough stretch of luck recently, injury-wise. Kevin Huerter is done for the year. Malik Monk is done for the year. Malik Monk was likely on a 6th man of the year campaign, in my opinion, playing at an extremely high level. And I think the key thing to remember is Malik Monk is part of their closing lineup. And without him, I think just the dynamism, if that's a word, of their backcourt, I think takes a big hit. I think one of their big strengths of that team is just the speed and athleticism of a backcourt of Fox and Monk, and what that presents to teams defensively. And without Monk, that really, really hurts them, and especially losing Monk and Huerter. That really, really hurts them. The good news, though, is that Fox has been on an absolute tear. I think he dropped, it was over 40 points the other night against the Celtics, although it wasn't a losing effort. And then he went off again tonight against the Thunder, again in losing effort. So their star, De'Aaron Fox, is giving you the production. He's trying to do everything he can. It's just a little bit unfortunate right now with, how their health situation is at the moment.
Yeah, the health situation is a little bit of a predicament. Let me ask you this. What do you think is what would make for a successful run for the Kings before I kind of give my thoughts? You think it's get out of the play-in and at least put up a fight in the first round, or do you think they need to build off what they did last year and try to make it into the second round and win a playoff series?
Well, I think it's interesting because I saw a stat the other day saying, their record is pretty much identical to how it was last year when they were the 3 seed. It's just the West has gotten better.
Yeah.
So, originally I would have said, yeah, you want to build off of what you did last year. I think you would want to, take a first round series to the brink at the very minimum. But now that these injuries have hit, I think a realistic expectation is, you know, just getting out of the play-in tournament. It's going to be a complete dogfight, I think,
Yeah.
and they definitely have the star power in the team to do it. I think with how well Sabonis and Fox are playing together, they have a shot, 100%. And the underrated thing is they've been defending much better as well as of late. I think since the All-Star break, I saw a stat that their defensive rating has been, I think, 109.3 since the All-Star break, which is really solid. I think that's top 10 in the NBA in that span. So it's not all hopeless, but I definitely, if I was a betting man, I probably wouldn't put my money on the Kings as of right now to beat some of these healthier teams that are also in form right now. But they'll be a tough out in any playing game, 100%.
Yeah, you took the words right out of my mouth. Look, they had the league's number one offense last year, and that's dropped back to still above league average just because of how good Monk was when he was healthy, how good Fox and Sabonis have been, and kind of the style that they play. But now with Monk out, that takes away another scorer and a shooter and some size defensively. I still think they'll be able to, score at a pretty high level just because of Fox and Sabonis. But the point I wanted to make was defensively, actually, they've actually been above league average. They're 14th right now in defensive rating, but they're fifth defensively in defensive rating over the 11 games that Keon Ellis has been in the starting lineup. And I think that if they continue to defend somewhere around that level, they could be a real tough out. Right. Not only in this play-in tournament, but I think they could get out of the play-in tournament and potentially give whoever they match up against a little bit of
their money for sure.
Yeah, a run for their money, absolutely.
I think just the great thing for the Kings is Fox is a absolute handful to guard in a playoff scenario. Someone who's as quick as he is in the fast break and just so slippery and just in general. I think that gives you an edge. And then also with all these injuries, I think if that gives the opportunity for Keegan Murray to take more shots and kind of break out a little bit, I think that might be what's best for their franchise anyway. So hopefully Keegan Murray can take advantage of this.
Yeah. Okay. What are your thoughts on the Pelicans? They're right now in the 7th spot.
Well, I think the big thing with the Pelicans right now has been the rise of, or the return, I guess, of Zion. But I would call it the rise because just he's reached a level that he hasn't been at in his career, in my opinion. Watching that game the other night against the Suns, I mean, it felt like a legacy game almost, like a big time game late in the regular season to keep your team in the mix to get in one of those top 6 playoff spots. He was making big defensive plays. He was getting switched on to KD and Bradley Beal, staying in front, getting blocks, getting out in transition, just being a beast that we knew that we thought he would be coming out of Duke. Like, that explosiveness is back now, and he's showing it on the defensive end and the offensive end now. And I think that just gives this team a whole new dynamic, because with his struggles defensively before, no matter how great you had wings on the perimeter. It was always going to be a struggle if you had a bad defensive front court with, Zion and, Valanciunas is solid, but he's still a very slow-footed big. So with Zion improving defensively, I think that really changes things for them. And I think that right now it's just all about hanging on, getting in that 6th spot. And if they can do that, I think they can make their first round series a very competitive series. And if things fall the right way, could get out of the first round, maybe.
Yes. Surprisingly, they won 3 of their first 4 games after Brandon Ingram's knee injury. And, recently they've lost, I think it was 4 in a row.
Yeah.
And they've slipped out of the top 6 in the West. Now, that I believe can still get back into that 6th seed. But Brandon Ingram is still out. Now, I think he could possibly return on Thursday. And that would be awesome because, number one, they're playing Sacramento. And, that's a Sacramento team that has been beaten up by this Pelicans team a lot. The Pelicans are 4-0 and kind of have had, for multiple reasons, the Kings' number here recently. They're 4-0 in the season. They're going to visit Sacramento on Thursday, and Ingram has averaged 25 points on 53% from the field and 56% from 3, almost 50-50-90 shooting splits over the 4 games with the Kings. So if they could get Brandon Ingram back with 3 games remaining, get his feet under him after this stretch where he's been out going into the playoffs, and you have Zion playing the way that he's playing, which you're absolutely right about. Yes, if they have those two, Brandon Ingram and Zion Williamson, they could, and could is the preemptive word there, make a good run at this thing. Because I would actually like to see them win around if they're healthy.
Yeah.
I think that would mark a successful season for the Pelicans. The problem is, well, there are a couple problems. Number one, they've kind of been, well, first of all, before Ingram got hurt, they were one of 4 teams in the league that ranked top 10 on both ends of the floor in offensive and defensive rating. But offensive consistency has been an issue. And when they get behind, they haven't been all that great. They're 3-19 when trailing at halftime, 0-7 since the All-Star break. They lost to the Suns and the Magic last week. It seems to me they're kind of a first half front running team. They like to get out to a lead. And only 28 of their 78 games so far have been within 5 points in the last 5 minutes. They're either up by a lot or they're trailing by more than that. So it'll be interesting. They're one of the more polarizing teams,
definitely,
in the Western Conference, and I'm gonna make appointment viewing if once Brandon Ingram comes back to kind of watch them if I can before the play-in tournament begins. But the good thing for them is if you do get forced into the play-in, you have that kind of pillow, that soft pillow that you can land on if you were to slip up in the first game, because you would get another opportunity. And if you stick in that 7 spot, which I think should be no issue because they have the head-to-head, all the tiebreakers over the Kings and stuff, you have the home court advantage. So I like where the Pelicans are at. They just need a healthy roster. They just need Ingram to get back on the floor.
Right. Yeah, and they have some interesting decisions to make in the offseason if things don't close well this season. Like particularly, I think CJ McCollum might become expendable, especially with the rise of Trey Murphy off the bench and wanting to get him into the starting lineup. Probably, I think Trey Murphy is a guy that at his peak, I think he could get to a point where he could average 20 a game. I really do believe that. So they have some interesting decisions to make here moving forward, but maybe we'll get to that in some off-season talk. But for now, let's move on to the Phoenix Suns.
Yes, let's move on to the Suns, who are currently
getting smacked by the Clippers.
They're getting absolutely smacked by the Clippers. Smacked so hard that they're actually getting doubled up right now at halftime.
Oh my gosh!
Why does
this always happen to them?
they've got 33 points at half, and the Clippers have 66. But let's talk about them, because coming into this game, they were 46-32, sitting right now in the 6th spot in the West. Now, they're actually kind of tied with the Pelicans for the 6-7 spot right now. Because they're both 2.5 games back of the Mavericks for the 2 seed. The Suns are, they have been playing some decent basketball, 7-3 in their last 10. And they've had a pretty good season, 46-32. If they can hold on to this 6th spot, that would be nice. But what do you – I mean, obviously, we can talk about the trio all day. We could talk about, Bradley Beal. We could talk about Kevin Durant. We could talk about Devin Booker. But what are going to be the things you're looking for the Suns to get where they want to go? And what is the minimum expectation for them, do you think, going in?
Well, when they made the trade for Bradley Beal, I mean, it really just became championship or nothing, because we knew what was coming with the new salary cap rules that have come in and the second apron and all that type of stuff. So with the Bradley Beal trade, really the bottom line was like, it's going to be a whole lot of, minimum guys, the Eric Gordons of the world, all those types of things coming off the bench. And you're going to have to get the dominant play out of those 3 guys to where with one of those guys on the floor at all times, at least, you can get a really good offense and a solid enough defense. And really, it's been, I think the big thing for me with the Suns is there's just a little bit of a lack of continuity. And I think sometimes there's still a struggle with just the hierarchy of things. I think with Booker being the OG, face of the franchise of the Suns, like he's the guy, I think. And I think that will kind of come to fruition as these guys get more acclimated with each other, as well as obviously Kevin Durant, kind of aging as well. So offense, like when I watch this team, just something just feels off. I think that's the bottom line. Like, just I don't know if it's a continuity thing. I don't know if it's just an offensive synergy thing, but just from a standpoint of those 3 guys should be involved in every single offensive action of some way or another. Like, I just don't think there should be a point where, we have Kevin Durant sitting in the corner on the opposite wing or in the opposite corner. Like, I just don't think that's so. I just don't think that's quality offense. I think that's a bad use of the talent that you have.
Yeah, I have a lot to say on Phoenix. So there are a couple things I'd like to see Frank Vogel do come playoff time that I think he could experiment with. Now, obviously, you don't want to be like trying to figure out shit in the first round playoff series. But there are things I think they could do that could give themselves maybe not a better chance, but could at least like keep them in a series, give them a good shot to win first round series, given whatever matchup that they get. Likely going to be a 6-3 or 7-2 matchup. First thing is, I think we're going to see Frank Vogel, because we've already seen some of this already, or we've seen variations of it. I think, depending on the matchup, he's going to lean more into some bigger lineups. We've seen it already. We've seen variations of it. But at times, when I've watched them, they've had lineups where they go bigger. They go Yusuf Nurkic, they go Kevin Durant, and they go Bol on the floor together at the same time. And, you know, they did it earlier in the season against, I believe it was the Los Angeles Lakers, and it actually had a great impact in a win or a couple wins for them earlier on in the season. They put Durant on LeBron, they put Nurkic to battle down low with Davis and kind of bang with him down low, and then they used Bol as kind of a, you know, a roamer on the perimeter. They put him on Austin Reeves at times with his long frame.
Right.
And they used a similar tactic, I believe, in a game against the Nuggets earlier this season, where they put Bol on Christian Braun for a number of possessions. Now, Bol is a limited defensive player, but if you can put him on an opponent's, third
non-shooter,
third or fourth offensive option outside the paint, he can have some success just because of his length, right? So I don't know. I think it'll depend on the matchup, but we could also see Drew Eubanks in place of Nurkic, and that would be no surprise to me. And you could have two of Booker, Beal, or Grayson Allen, two of those guys out there with that bigger trio, which I think would give a nice balance to a lineup because you could have shooters on the floor with those guys, right? And you still have Kevin Durant. So I think it'll depend on the matchup, but I think that could be something we could see Frank Vogel go to. Also, I think this may sound ridiculous to some people, but I think, given the ability, I think, and we've seen this already, when Booker missed a couple games, I think sometimes within games we could see them experiment with Nurkic actually bringing the ball up the court and becoming kind of an offensive hub for his teammates to kind of work off of. Now, obviously, when they have Booker, Beal, Durant healthy, this probably won't be used very much, but it could be kind of a wrinkle that they throw in to maybe confuse opponents, or maybe opponents will be ready for it. I have no idea. But imagine having those three all-star level players, and Nurkic is kind of the player who's handling the ball, running dribble handoffs, calling the plays, running the offense. We've seen it before. Kind of think of it as, in my opinion, the Orlando Magic when they had Nikola Vucevic kind of acting as their best player.
Right.
A good passing big out of the post.
Right.
A little bit of shooting touch.
Like the elbow, kind of the wing, kind of DHOs, that kind of thing.
Kind of pass and screen action that I think would allow guys like Grayson Allen and Royce O'Neal to have, the kind of success, get open for 3-point shot attempts, which is what they want ultimately. So you could see a little bit of that. I don't know how much you'll see of that given Booker, Beal, and Durant are all healthy, but you could see that. And then also, I think, depending on who they get, they could go to a lot of 4-guard lineups, which is going to be huge for them. And it could have kind of a twofold positive impact on their team. Because for all of Yusuf Nurkic's abilities, and I've already kind of addressed how important I think he could possibly be at times for them offensively, he's still a very limited player who I think, depending on certain matchups, could be exposed
Yeah, played off the floor a little bit.
Yes. So, you know, I think we could see a lot of Durant at center, and we could see them go smaller, with some of their smaller guards.
Right. Royce O'Neal, I think, has been a really good weapon for them since trading for him as well.
I think we could see, you have
there's a lot of positives there for the Suns that you can kind of hang your hat on if you're a Suns fan right now. I think the bottom line that you kind of look back to is like, as long as like Devin Booker, Bradley Beal, and Kevin Durant are healthy, you have a chance. And we saw Devin Booker reach a level last year in the playoffs that was just absolutely ridiculous.
Yeah.
And just with the shot making, all those types of things, like if he reaches that level of unconscious on this version of the Suns, then who knows what could happen.
Yeah, but absolutely right. Just to finish my point before we move on to Dallas, if Vogel uses kind of that 4-guard lineup with Durant at the 5, the results could be glorious, because on the perimeter you've got Booker and Beal. That's enough playmaking, shooting, and passing to make it difficult for anybody on most nights.
Right.
You could also have Grayson Allen and Royce O'Neal, who are both kind of able to defend bigger players than themselves for stretches of games. I think Allen is kind of an actually underrated defender.
Definitely.
And he's leading the league in three-point shooting right now at 47%. O'Neal is no slouch himself, shooting 39%. And combine those two guys with Booker, Beal, and Durant, who can be anybody, when they're healthy, on their good days, they could blow some teams away with their scoring bursts. And then you have, Eric Gordon, who could fill in for some of those minutes with these lineups that are smaller. So I don't know. Those are my thoughts on the Suns. I'd like to see. I'll be paying attention to those three things. Like, how much do they use each of those three things, and then what translates to the most success, and how much success they actually have. But let's move on to the Mavericks, because I know you're eager to talk about Dallas. They're right now in the 5 spot, sitting at, coming into the night, 48-30, but they're now 49-30. Playing excellent basketball. They're 9-1 in their past 10 games. Luka and Kyrie are almost unstoppable. And some of the acquisitions that they made at the trade deadline are paying big dividends. So why don't you give your spiel on the Dallas Mavericks? And then I have a lot to say as well.
Well, I think the biggest thing right now is the defense and the rebounding as well. That's been huge. Like the just offensive rebounding presence was non-existent before these trades, and now that you've brought Gafford in and you have Derek Lively coming off the bench, who I haven't really given it much thought, so don't quote me on it, but I think he'd probably be up there as one of the best backup centers in the league. Maybe up there with like a Bobby Portis or something like that. But regardless, I think having Lively and Gafford giving you kind of the same type of skill set, kind of that continuity throughout the game at the center position, that's, I think, been huge for this team as well. Like, they're defending at a high level. They're not relying on the 3-point shot as much to win games. Like a lot of these games that they've had here recently, they actually haven't shot the 3 ball well at all. And they've been able to still come out on top in these games. You mentioned it earlier. They've been winning a lot of close games as well. And it's hard to know how much that will translate to the playoffs. Because a couple of years ago, the Suns were actually they were like historically great in the clutch in that year that they had CP and Devin Booker, and they were the 1 seed. But obviously, we know what ended up happening in the playoffs when they lost to the Mavs, kind of collapsed that way. But like, it's hard to know if that type of thing will really translate to the playoffs. But I think the biggest thing is, I think the role players have really found, like, really settled down into their roles well. and the pieces are starting to fit together here. I think one of the keys that I'm going to look for as a Mavericks fan is, one, off the bench, how good is Tim Hardaway Jr. going to be? Because I think his scoring off the bench is going to be very important. And then two, can we get Maxi Kleba to start hitting shots? Because if we can get Maxi Kleba's three-point shot back going again, he's had a really injured-riddled season. He's been struggling with his jump shot. In that Western Conference Finals run, he got really hot from deep, and that was really important for us because of what he gives us defensively. So if he can start shooting the ball well again, it'll give us the versatility to be able to go small ball in certain situations. So that, I think that will be a really important aspect.
Yes. So here's my thing. I think the Mavericks, and look, hot stretches in March, right before the playoffs, at this particular time, in some situations can be kind of fool's gold at times. But I think there's something real here with this Mavericks team. And I think they're potentially the NBA's most dangerous sleeper team. Here's kind of why I think that. Number one, over the past 25 games since the trade deadline, they sport the statistical profile of a bona fide NBA championship contender. They're third in net rating, they're fourth in offensive rating, they're seventh in defensive rating. And they've got wins over several of the teams that we think are built to win it all. That's number one. They're fifth place in the West. I don't know where it stands with like 4 games left, but they have a relatively easy schedule here down the stretch. 6 easiest remaining in the league. And, you know, when I watch them, they're sharp, brisk, dazzling, explosive. You know, no deficit seems insurmountable, as we saw the other night against the Rockets. And, you know, they're first in clutch offense. They're sixth in clutch defense. They're fifth in clutch assist rate. They're second in crunch time winning percentage, as I mentioned earlier, winning all those close games. Who knows how that translates specifically come playoff time? It'll depend on matchups, but that's at least you'd rather have them be good in crunch time than not be good in crunch time. Absolutely. But this all starts with Luka. We can't talk about the Mavericks without talking about Luka. This guy is something else. Like, he is legitimately, I've never seen anything like Luka. He's this season in particular, he's creative, he's resourceful, and I think he spent much of this season, his 6th season in the league, kind of separating himself from almost every other NBA player not named Nikola Jokic. I mean, what he's doing this year is something else. He's averaging the 2nd most points in the league the last time I checked, the 3rd most assists, almost 10 a game, pretty much 10 a game, a whole bunch of rebounds, as we know he rebounds the ball a lot. He's shooting 75% at the rim, which is ridiculous. He's making nearly 40% of the 6 step back threes that he hoists each game, which are beautiful to watch. And, you know, I could go on and on and on, but production, efficiency, degree of difficulty, like, the things that he does just don't really jive with what actual reality for most basketball players is, if that makes sense. Stats really don't capture what Luka is. Like, the fear and the doubt that he instills into a lot of the defenders around the league, I imagine, running those high pick and rolls time after time after time, dismantling pretty much every defensive coverage that you can possibly throw at him, whether it's a blitz, switch, drop coverage. As a playmaker, you know, he has the size, the strength, and the electricity to invent new passes. Like, every time I watch him, he's doing something new. You know, everybody, he makes some passes that I think everybody but probably Jokic would even dare to try to make. So there's my Luka. I mean, he's just I don't know where I'd rank him in the league. We can do a players ranking here fairly soon or some tiers or something. But he's great. Now here's why I think this will actually translate. His usage rate, or his true usage rate, 64.4% leads the league. No other player is above 60%. But it's actually his lowest usage rate, if I'm reading this correctly, since 2019. And the percentage of time that he's actually on ball, his on ball percentage, is 45.9%, which again is very high. But it's also,
lower. Yeah.
It's also lower than it has been in the previous 4 or 5 years. And I think that downshift is accommodating and it has a major ripple effect. I don't think this Dallas team feels as top heavy as they maybe have been in the past couple of years. And unlike before, I think it's an actual team with some defensive stoppers, some tertiary ball handlers.
Yeah, that's been big too.
Some rim protectors, some rim runners. You think about it, Derek Lively,
athleticism on the wings as well.
Some spot up threats, some acrobatic athletes. Like they have just a little bit of everything. This doesn't feel like one of those top heavy rosters that's just, Luka and then a bunch of other have not.
Yeah, like a bunch of other 3-and-D guys. I mean, that's kind of how it was a couple years ago when they were in the conference finals. It was him, Jalen, like a pre-star version of Jalen Brunson, kind of breaking out, but not quite what he is right now. And then a lot of 3-and-D guys.
Yeah. So let me finish. Bear with me. They have, I think, important roles that have been filled and accepted by a lot of these guys, which is important come the playoffs. And, much of it is thanks to Luka. He's the franchise player who's basically struck a perfect balance, in my opinion, between savior on some nights and an empowerer for the rest of the roster. That's really based on his greatness. And I don't think they're all that dependent, or at least not as dependent as they have been in the past couple of years on his greatness. If they need to be for certain nights, they can be. But, PJ Washington, Derek Jones Jr., Daniel Gafford, Tim Hardaway Jr., Josh Green, Derek Lively. Like, this broadens Luka's power.
Yeah.
Because those guys kind of feed off the attention that Luka draws. And we get, all through all those different things. And as I mentioned at the start of this, like sometimes hot stretches near the end of the season can be fool's gold for really kind of projecting a team's postseason success. And as great as Doncic has been, title contention will still be kind of far off if, he's just supported by a bunch of these role player types who don't shine as bright come the postseason.
Right.
But the difference is they have Kyrie Irving, who's kind of Luka's sparkly sidekick and a massive variable who now I think, in my opinion, qualifies as the most impressive teammate Luka has ever had.
Definitely.
And,
he's been perfect as a number two.
He deserves a lot of credit because, as far as I'm concerned, correct me if I'm wrong, he's been available.
Oh, yeah, for sure.
I mean, has he had an injury stint or a stint where he's been out for
December? He did have like a 2-week stint where he was out, but that's been it. I mean, he's been available. He's been extremely consistent. He's been really good when Luka's been out as well. I'll say one last thing on the. Do you have anything more you want to add before I add something?
Well, no, I would just say he hasn't he missed that 2-game stretch in December, but that's December.
Yeah,
like, nobody is really going to kill you for that. He's not missed a game since February 3rd.
Yeah.
And since February 3rd, he's averaging about 26 points, 5 assists, 5 rebounds, while eclipsing 50, 40, 90 shooting splits.
Wow.
That's what I'll say about the Mavericks.
Yeah. Here, the last thing I'll say to finish off this conversation, I know we spent a lot of time on it, but the beginning of games is going to be really important for the Mavericks. And here's why. I think you have two high usage ball handlers on your team, obviously, with Luka and Kyrie. But I think the big thing is, I think Luka and his growth as a point guard, he has to make sure he's getting his guys involved early. Sometimes he gets into a mode where he comes out and maybe he sees a certain defensive coverage and he's like, oh, I'm going to go score. And then you go out and score, and then he goes off the floor, and then the team goes into a drought because they're not in rhythm. They haven't touched the ball. So I think early on in games, he has to, I think, make sure he emphasizes getting his teammates involved early, even if that means sacrificing some of his scoring a little bit early on in the game. Because actually, recently he's had some of his lowest games in terms of shots taken. And I think the interesting thing is, in some of those games, that those have been the games where the team has actually played the best, which is interesting. So it's just something to think about. But I think that's gotta be a key for him. Go heading into the playoffs.
Okay. So let's run something by you real fast. Would you rather run through 4-1 and maybe make this an hour and a half episode, or cut it right here, do a part 2 of this particular episode where we spend more time on 4-1 and maybe talk about some other NBA related things going on right now, such as the Spurs and Wemby, whatever else is going on. I'm fine with both. You pick.
I'm honestly feeling like maybe just continuing. I feel like we're kind of on a roll. So
Let's do it then. Who's in the 4th spot right now? I believe it's the Clippers, correct?
Yeah, it's the Clippers right now.
All right, well, go ahead.
Right now, we're locked into Clippers Mavs Part 3, which I don't know how I feel about, but it'll be a banger regardless. It'll be a banger of a series regardless. But for the Clippers, I think the interesting thing for them is they had that amazing stretch heading into the All-Star break where they went on an absolute tear, entered kind of the top 3 seed conversation. And then since the All-Star break, they've kind of been a bit here lately.
Yes.
A lot of guys in and out of the lineup. And it's been weird because it's been a different guy every night. They've kind of entered kind of the plague that they were in kind of the last few years as an organization where, like tonight Kawhi is out. Oh, this night Paul George is out. Oh, this night James Harden or Russ is out. Like it's kind of a weird dynamic, and it's hard to get a rhythm that way. But they've kind of wrote the ship here since having that little rough stretch of like below 500 basketball and like a just under 30 game sample. But here recently, they've kind of wrote the ship, kind of gotten back to kind of stabilized and gotten back to how they want to play defensively. But for you, what are going to be the keys for the Clippers?
Well, first of all, this has been a kind of up and down season for the Clippers. They're sitting at 50-28, probably 51-28 after this Suns game wraps up. Look, I mean, if they draw Dallas in the first round and either Minnesota or OKC in the second round, I think the expectation amongst many, if they're healthy, is going to be that at their best, they should probably reach the conference finals.
Yeah.
If they If they draw Denver in the second round, though, I think the expectation will probably be that they put up a great fight if they can't ultimately take Denver down. But the biggest thing is they're going to need to be fully healthy for any deep run to be possible. And that's been an issue over the last month or two, right? But this is probably the best that we've seen the Clippers since, like, in my opinion, maybe before the pandemic.
Yeah, I think the 2020 season is probably the last time we saw them play this well.
They just have so many different ways that they can beat you. They're third in offensive rating. Now, their defense at times this year has been kind of lacking. And they're kind of, at least statistically, kind of league average on defense. But they have the capability. Like, they have enough on-ball defenders. They have enough length on the perimeter. They have enough.
They've been. I think they've been decent in the half court, and they've been horrible in transition defense.
Yeah, they have enough size and they have enough athleticism. They have the personnel to be a really good, devastatingly good defensive basketball team. They have depth. Like, Russ at times has played really good basketball off the bench. I believe he's already secured a triple double tonight, his 6 with the Clippers, and he's been pretty good. Like, as good of a version of Russ as you probably could have hoped for when you got him. Off the bench, he's kind of accepted that role. Kawhi is still ridiculously good when he's on the court. Paul George has been pretty good this year. And I like a lot of their, secondary and tertiary options. I think the biggest key is going to be not turning the ball over, not getting into those transition track meets where their defense isn't allowed to be set. They need to play half court kind of games. And I think, just having Kawhi and Paul George on the floor will give you a shot pretty much against anybody. Obviously, a big question is going to be James Harden. And, we'll see where that goes. But I'm interested. What are your thoughts on kind of the James Harden dynamic of all of this? Like, where do you stand on that?
Well, when he came to the Clippers, the thought process was like, "Oh, you won't have to rely on him as much in the playoffs because he'll be the third option on this team." But at the same time, though, on this team, he still is the main ball handler. He's still making decisions. He's kind of your guy that's going to be controlling the pace of the game as well, which you just mentioned is going to be very important. I think there's still a lot of, concern there for sure. I mean, on the way this team is formulated, he doesn't have to be aggressive scoring, but I do think 15 a night should be an expectation for sure. I think being relatively efficient, giving you, a lot of assists, giving you low turnovers, I think he can give you that. But the problem's going to come when his step back, when he gets into his step back 3 game, and it kind of bogs down the offense. Because once those shots aren't falling and he's struggling defensively on the other end, then you've got problems. So I honestly don't know what to feel about it. I'm just kind of waiting to see it, honestly.
I am too. Last thing I'll say on the Clippers. Last couple of things. They lost their first 5 games with James Harden. There was an adjustment period there. There was kind of an incubation period there. Had to get adjusted. It was earlier on in the season. Right. But since then, and despite a pretty sluggish 5 weeks since the All-Star break, they've had the league's third best record, 43-20, and the second most efficient offense, 120.2 points scored per 100 possessions with James Harden playing. This is a team that's seemingly built for the playoffs when healthy. Although it's interesting that their record within the top 9 teams in the West is 12-16, or was coming into tonight, and 11-12 since that 0-5 start with Harden. So they could be better. But if you're the Clippers, as long as he's healthy, you have who I could argue has been the best playoff performer of the last 7 years, Kawhi Leonard, who's averaged 29.6 points on a true shooting percentage of 63.5% over 62 playoff games since 2017.
Wow. Yeah.
His health
speaks for itself.
His health is going to be the most important thing for this team. Now, you've obviously got 2 games against Phoenix this week, and that's important to kind of make sure that you stay. I mean, winning one of those 2 is going to be very important to stay, I think, within the top 4 in the West. And it looks like they're going to take care of business tonight, or at least the last time we checked. But yeah, I mean, those are really my thoughts. I'm kind of in a wait and see approach with the Clippers, just because we haven't seen them fully healthy here the past couple weeks. It's been kind of one guy's out, one guy's back, that kind of flow. So let's move on to the Thunder.
Yeah, let's talk Thunder. Man, I'll start with this. Like, I think this Thunder team, the biggest thing for them is going to be Jalen Williams and Chet Holmgren. Like, if their play translates to the postseason and they're giving you the scoring that we expect from them, like I think for Jalen Williams, that would be if he's giving you, 22 as a second option, which I think he can do, because I think his type of game, he can elevate in the playoffs. I really do believe that. He's a very physical player. He loves to attack the rim. He's got a nasty mid-range game, very underrated in my opinion. So if Jalen Williams is gonna give you like legit championship level second option type of play, and then Chet Holmgren can give you same thing, third option type of like production, then you're in business, because then like your role players can kind of fall in line and continue to like play roles that they're comfortable playing in. But if say Jalen Williams goes cold, or if Chet Holmgren goes cold, or if somehow Chet Holmgren just isn't shooting the ball well, or is struggling a little bit in certain matchups, then things get a little bit dicey. Like that's where the Lakers matchup to me is interesting, because that's where you can put Anthony Davis on the floor with Chet Holmgren, and then kind of in those like small lineups that the Thunder like to run with Chet, and then kind of 2 wings and then 2 guards that are under 6'8" for the Thunder outside of Chet. That's where things get a little dicey from a rebounding standpoint.
Yeah. Here's something interesting to watch here the last 5 days of the regular season. The Thunder had the tiebreaker over the Nuggets, who are in first, or right now could be in first place, I guess. They're tied. And they only trail them, at least coming into the night, by a game. So they can still move back up. But they need their guys back in the lineup, because
right.
SGA and Jalen Williams have missed the past 4 games.
Right. But they did get both of them back tonight, which was big.
So that's great news. Right. That's what I was going to get to. Because the Thunder, with those guys, are actually top 5 on both ends of the floor, which is remarkable given that just 2 years ago, they were 24-58 and a minus 8 points net rating per 100 possessions with those guys. So the step in the leap that this team has taken from 2 years ago to last year to this year, where they could be a number 1 seed, is remarkable. Given that this particular team ranks 4th in the percentage of its minutes that have come from either rookies or second-year players. 41% of the minutes being played on this Oklahoma City Thunder team have come from rookies or second-year players. So I do think that, and this is probably pretty obvious, they're different than Minnesota in a respect in that this is their first playoff appearance with this group. So I think they're still pretty young relative to the success that they're having. And we have to remember that this team didn't even make the playoffs until last year, but is now in contention for the 1 seed. So there's probably still another leap that they're going to have to make. But I still think that they're so talented and so dynamic, and they have SGA, who's just so incredibly great, who I would vote in the top 3 of my MVP power poll if I were doing it right now, that they can absolutely win a first-round series. And I think if they did that and they give their second-round matchup, whoever that might be, a run for their money at the very least, that could be
a really big stepping stone for sure.
A really big stepping stone and a successful year, because they've risen so fast as a team that the expectation has dramatically changed. Like they've dramatically changed the expectations for themselves in real time just because of like how all of a sudden how good they are. And so I think they're in kind of a difficult situation and I don't know, they probably don't listen to a lot of the outside noise, but just the goalpost moving of the expectations when you're so good so fast could be kind of, from where I sit and where we sit, could be a little bit of a challenge for a team like the Thunder. But yeah. I mean, that's really what it comes down to. I mean, I think you hit it on the head. Certain matchups obviously won't be great for them as they are a little smaller. They don't have as much size on the interior. Still would have liked to, to have seen them go and get another big five who can come in and spell Chet, give you some rebounding, some more.
I think the interesting thing is they do have Bismack Biyombo, but they haven't been giving him minutes. So I wonder what's going on with there. I think.
Yeah.
Yeah, go ahead.
That's a good point, but I think it was a little surprising when they didn't make a move for someone, and maybe someone that they wanted just wasn't available. I don't know what happened, but the point being is there are matchups, as you mentioned, where it could get a little dicey from that perspective. But I do think, with how good they are when SGA and Jalen Williams have been on the floor together, with Jalen Williams being that kind of guy who can give you between 20 and 23, 24 points a night when he's at his best. I mean, that's legit. So we'll see where it goes for them. But right now, I believe they would match up with Phoenix. So
yeah,
I don't know, man. So. We'll see where that goes. Anything else on the Thunder before we get to Minnesota or Denver, whichever one is first?
I think it's just all about Jalen Williams elevating. Just if he can elevate his game in the playoffs and average that little bit more to where that pressure can come off of Shea a little bit, that would just be so huge. And I think they could even make a conference finals run if that were to happen. And the only team that is like somewhat comparable to them in terms of like a team that's this young that had playoff success is the 2010-11 Thunder. When
that's right.
Yeah. So that team did make it to the conference finals and took the Mavericks to, well, it was a 5-game series, but it was 5 very, very close games. So I think something like that could be on the cards for them if things fall correctly.
Yeah, that's even though Minnesota's in the 1 seed right now, let's talk about them first. and we'll get to the defending champions last. In terms of the Timberwolves, just real fast, your quick thoughts on where they sit, like their current situation, and give me a team just real fast you think would be great for them to play in the first round, and a team that maybe you think they probably wouldn't want to see in the first round, you wouldn't want to see for them in the first
round. Well, where they sit right now, I think, they've grown on me quite a bit in this last stretch without Cat, because I think this has been a stretch where they've really shown like the character of their team. Like they're a team that's just tough as nails, man. They've just fought tooth and nail here without Cat, because they haven't had as much offensive punch without Cat. Obviously, Mike Conley has stepped up, and Jordan McLaughlin has stepped up off the bench. There's been a lot of different players that have stepped up offensively, but defensively, man, they're as legit as it gets. I think they're absolutely fantastic defensively. I think by far the best defense in the league. Like if you take the entire year sample size. So where they sit right now, I love their coach in Chris Finch. I think that's a big deal for them. If I were to pick a matchup for them that's ideal, it would definitely be the Kings, because I do think they're vulnerable. I think the more likely matchup would, I think if they stay in the 1 seed, I think the most likely team to be in the 8 seed would probably be the Lakers right now. So I don't hate that matchup. Like I think they have the physicality to match the Lakers, definitely. Like their strengths align with the Lakers' strengths, and I think a lot of the things that they can present offensively as well, especially if they get Cat back, I think could be a problem for the Lakers also. Like I think the Lakers could have a problem defending Anthony Edwards in certain scenarios, because just the amount of wing defense they have. Like a lot of times when they put any one of their wing defenders on the floor, the problem is you sacrifice shooting at the same time if you put them on the floor, like the Cam Reddishes or the Jared Vanderbilts. So that would be a very interesting matchup.
Absolutely. They're 54-24. They're by far, shouldn't say by far, but they're first in offensive rating, and they're separated by like a couple points between them and Boston for first.
Oh, you mean defensive rating, right?
Yeah, defensive rating. They're closer to the league average in offensive rating, but I think, and obviously they're not as nearly as explosive nearly as good offensively without Karl-Anthony Towns and his 16-game absence. But I actually kind of like the things that Naz Reid provides. He's not necessarily a great offensive player, but I like, what he can provide, his size, rebounding and stuff. I think he's an important player for them come the postseason. Look, the defense remains the foundation. Their defense has allowed 6.9 fewer points per 100 possessions than the league average, which is 114.6 points per 100 possessions, which would be tied for the sixth best differential in the 28 seasons for which they've been tracking play-by-play data for that kind of stuff. They're 2-1 against the Nuggets, 2-0 with Rudy Gobert. And so that's interesting. I think for this Timberwolves team, when they acquired Rudy Gobert, I think the expectation was probably, from a lot of what I've heard, just taking the median 80%. They're 10% extreme here and 10% extreme over there. That they could get 50 plus wins and get into the second round multiple years. And that would probably mark a successful stretch just because that would be
some of the best years in their franchise's history.
Exactly. And it would. And I think they're more than good enough, especially on defense, to get out of the first round. I don't know if I worry all that much in a first round series because I think if Anthony Edwards elevates to another level and plays kind of like that 28, 29-year-old veteran, takes another step, and you have Cat back, you have Rudy Gobert, you have a lot of that depth and size and wing defense. I don't know if I worry all that much about a first round series. I think they're pretty well suited to probably get out of a first round series. The thing you probably kind of worry about with them might be kind of like, I don't know how to say it. Maybe like, I don't, I guess just execution in the half court offensive. Yeah. That's probably where you would get a little worried about them if games are close late, especially.
Yeah, I think the fourth quarter specifically is what I look at for sure.
But, if Anthony Edwards is what some think he can be, I don't know if that would be all that much of a problem. So we'll see.
Yeah, and the good thing is Anthony Edwards has taken a lot of strides in terms of his passing as well. So I early on in the season, I was kind of like, I don't know how legit they'll be come playoff time. But now that I've watched them over the course of the entire season and kind of this stretch without Cat, like this team, like they just have a lot of dogs, man. They're just so likable. I don't know, like I just think like Jalen McDaniels, like Nikhil Alexander-Walker off the bench, like they just got a lot of dudes that come in and they just hound you defensively, and it's kind of old school, and I like that a lot.
Yeah, I do think though that simply just making the playoffs isn't enough for them anymore. It's got to be win a series at the very least.
Definitely.
So I think the standard for success elevates this year come the postseason. But they're in a fantastic spot right now. All right, let's wrap this thing up and talk about Denver. Your thoughts on Denver? Can anyone beat them?
No. Well, okay, so here's what I'll say. I think even as a Mavs fan, I think Nikola Jokic is the MVP this year. And I'm probably I'm maybe the only Mavs fan on the planet that would say those words right now, but I mean, I just think this Nuggets team, they're like back to back is on the cards for them. I really do believe that. Like, I think they're a tier above everyone else in the Western Conference. I think right now it's them and everybody else kind of in a clump together as teams that can kind of challenge them and get to the conference finals if they're not on Denver's bracket. So with that being said, I think they match up well with just about every team in the West. I think, like, if you look at how they match up with, say, the Clippers, for example. Like, say they matched up with the Clippers in the second round. I think Jokic would probably cook Zubats if it really comes down to it. And I like, like, not to dumb it down a whole ton, but I just think that's really what it's going to come down to a lot of times. Like, a lot of these teams that are really good in the Western Conference, outside of the Timberwolves, I think the Timberwolves are the only team that I think would have the, right type of defensive personnel to limit this Denver offense. I think Minnesota is probably the only team that can do that, and even then, Minnesota has their own struggles offensively. So,
yeah,
I think with how good Jokic is and him being the best player in the world, the opportunity is there, man. Like it's there for the taking. They have the team to do it. Their, I think, closing lineup of their 5, I think, is maybe by the end of this run, maybe could go down as one of the best 5-man units we've seen in a very long time. But it's all just going to come down to can they do it again in the playoffs? I think they will.
Is this the year of the back-to-back? Is 2024 the year that we see a lot of back-to-backs? We've already seen Kansas City do it. We've seen UConn do it. Could we see Denver do it? I think it's absolutely in the cards, as you mentioned. I think, there's really not a whole lot else to say. I think another championship makes for success, unless there's a major injury to their starting 5. Which why would I even say that?
Yeah, no.
I I don't even know if just getting. I know it's really hard to do this thing. That's why I'm not. You know, it's hard to go back to back in any sport, as we know. That's not anything groundbreaking, but as good as this Nuggets team is, I don't know if just getting back to the finals is gonna be enough for them. I think they might have to win it. I think that's the standard that they've set for themselves internally.
Yeah, that's the expectation for sure.
And in reality, if they got to the finals and they just got bested by another great team, say it was Boston, I mean, that wouldn't be shameful in the slightest. But the Nuggets are now so good and seemingly like kind of Teflon in a way that repeating as champions should be the goal. They're too elite. They're 6 in offensive rating, which doesn't really do it justice for how good they are when they're at full strength and Jokic is doing Jokic things. And they're top 10 in defense. Like they can absolutely, wear you down defensively. I think Jamal Murray and Nikola Jokic on their best days probably make for the best duo in basketball. And I mean, I really don't have a whole lot else to say on the Nuggets. Like, what else is there to say? Is there something?
Well, I think Michael Porter Jr. has been huge for them this year. Yeah. With Jamal Murray being in and out of the lineup a little bit throughout the year. Michael Porter Jr. has been a rock for them. I don't think he's missed a game this season, actually. He's been really, really good, shooting very efficiently, making better decisions, showing a little bit of an off-the-dribble game as well. And then the last thing on the Nuggets would definitely be their bench. I think they've finally found the formula of okay, we're just gonna run our 8-man rotation of Reggie, Peyton Watson, and I think their third guy off the bench would probably be Christian Brown. Yep. So I think those are their 3 off the bench, and then having Aaron Gordon be their backup center role. I think that's the lineup you run with, and I think that's more than enough, I think.
I do too. There's really not a whole lot else to add there. Here's the final question. If somehow they were to get upset in say a conference finals series, like who would be the most likely team in your opinion to pull that
off? I'm slightly biased, but the Mavericks.
I'll take it. I'll take that as an answer. A lot of people might not agree with that, but I'll take it.
It's a tough one because I think, like I said, I think it's the Nuggets, and then every team from the Thunder, the Timberwolves, all the way down to like maybe. I think the Mavericks is probably where that tier ends. All of those teams clumped together, I think, make up a tier of teams that can maybe push the Denver to like six games or so.
Yeah.
At their very peak, playing at their very best, I think. But that's the problem. I think
so funny.
It would take a lot. Like it would take Luka maybe averaging 45, 13 and 13 or something. I don't know, man. Like
For those of you watching, like, did you hear what he just said? He said, if these teams are healthy, it's gonna take. He basically, I'm paraphrasing, but he basically said they could maybe take the Nuggets to 6 or 7 games.
Yeah.
Not even maybe beat the Nuggets. He said maybe take them to 6 or 7 games. That's ridiculous.
I mean that's just how I feel about it, man. Like I just really do think there's a gap there. And we'll see what happens, but it'll be interesting to see how some of these other teams in the West adjust to what the Nuggets are doing, because I think this is one of those moments where they match up well with everybody. Like it's crazy.
All right.
Like I think people are going to start drafting Jokic stoppers. I think it's getting to that point.
Well, if you guys wanted a full Western Conference breakdown, we gave it to you in droves tonight. 90 minutes talking NBA basketball, like we like to do here on the Raw Prospect Podcast. Just under a week, pretty much a week exactly, actually, from the play-in tournament, and a week and a half until these first round series get underway. I'm super excited for this. So just to give you a recap, at the beginning we went through the play-in, and we basically did a full breakdown of each team 10-1. And I don't know if we were planning to do that, but hey, we got through two teams in 90 minutes. So we spent about, I can't do math right now. We basically spent like 9 minutes per team.
That's not too bad.
Not too bad. So if you like the Mavericks, I basically wax poetic about the Mavericks. If you like the Nuggets, we wax poetic about the Nuggets. And we were pretty fair on most of the other teams, I think. So hope you guys enjoyed. If you like more of this content, well, we have a lot more coming for you here in the next 2 months over the course of the NBA playoffs. 2 months plus, I guess it would be, because it's basically 2 months, a little over. My guess would be that we'll be back later next week to react to the play-in. We're probably not going to preview the play-in, but we'll definitely react to those games. And then we'll be kind of taking a look into the first round series, kind of like we always do. And then we'll probably have periodical episodes every week, kind of recap what's been happening, look into the next series, preview the next. It'll kind of be kind of like what we have been doing the past two or so years throughout the playoffs. We might throw some wrinkles in here and there, but it'll be very similar. So this is where the NBA content is at its peak. It's going to be here from now until like through basically the draft, which is kind of weak this year, but absolutely through free agency is when this is our peak NBA time, if you will. So make sure you tune into that. And then I'm assuming tomorrow, maybe tonight, but I'm assuming tomorrow we'll have 2 episodes for you. We'll have the Masters episode, which would be awesome. I'm so excited for that. Yeah. And then we'll have Dit Hole, which you guys are going to want to tune into. We've got some interesting stuff on there, especially if you're into Texas football and if you're into all this madness going on in the coaching carousel already in college basketball. And we'll talk about the greatness of the UConn Huskies as well. So with all that being said, thank you guys for tuning in. If you're tuning in to us at 11:15 p.m. at night on a Tuesday, we greatly appreciate that. And we'll see you tomorrow night. So just like the Suns' chances of beating the Clippers tonight, we are going, gone. Peace.
Peace out.